here for Aria at Home Historical Romance Edition, where I'll be talking with two wonderful authors. Tonight, going to be talking with Katrina Kendrick about her book, The Wayward Duke, and My Lady's Secrets by Katy Moran. They're both Aria, head of Zeus books, so we're just waiting for them to send requests to join. Hope everyone's all right tonight. Right, I'm just trying to get into these requests. Right, it's being awkward, which is fun. Just what we don't need. Right, let me, okay. Work, fingers crossed. Nope. Hi!
Hi, hello.
There. Right, one more to add. We're almost there. Just waiting for Katy. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm fine. Glad it seems to be working. Apart from, oh,
Yeah, this is only like the third live I've ever done, so it's
yeah,
just a
it can
bit.
be a bit hiccupy sometimes. It's not letting Katy join, so let me see if I can request cancel her request and invite her myself. See if that one works. Oh, right. It's gone cold tonight, hasn't it? Or is it just up here in the north? Is it?
Oh
I
no,
don't know
it's
whereabouts in the world
definitely
are you?
I'm in Perthshire, so in Perthshire, Scotland. So I'm a bit, yeah, it's quite cold.
Further north than me, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Let's see if this is. Sorry about this, Katy and everyone else. Ah, there we go.
Hi,
Hello, nice to see you.
good to see you guys. Hello.
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 Right, so now we're all here. As I said, we're here to talk about two books. We're talking about The Wayward Duke by Katrina, sorry. And we're talking about My Lady's Secrets by Katy Moran. Can we start with you telling us a bit about your book, starting with you, Katrina? Can you tell us a bit about The Wayward Duke?
The Wayward Duke is a second chance romance about a estranged couple who have been estranged for 8 years. They are forced together to code break for Her Majesty's government, and feelings return.
They certainly do. What about you, Katy? Can you tell us about the My Lady's Secrets? What happens in that?
Yeah, so it's also a second chance romance with an element of spying as well, and the estranged couple being brought back together again, ostensibly on one final mission. And we've also got Lord Byron thrown in there as well for that extra bit of chaos as well.
Yes, it was there was a lot of chaos and pandemonium for sure in that book. It was great. So just to let everybody know, there will be a Q&A session at the end. So if you want to pop your questions in the comment section, then Head of Zeus are going to be keeping an eye on those for us. And there'll also be a giveaway on their account tomorrow. Friday, sorry. So I'll mention that again later. So you don't worry, you're not going to forget about that. But we're going to first talk about a bit more about the books. Okay. So, as you've both said, they're both second chance romances. What is it about second chance romances that made you want to write about them in this book? First, you, Katy, first.
I think for me, it was the appeal of Cresta and Greville having got together when they were really young, and having genuine feelings for each other at the time, but just not really having the maturity or the life experience to work through the problems that life kind of threw their way, and also that they sort of inflicted upon themselves as well.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it was just the appeal of bringing them back together and just thinking, can they figure this out? It was that challenge of writing a book with a very romantic element to it, just fitting together all those elements and seeing if they could fight their way through to make it work for themselves again.
Yeah, it was definitely, I enjoyed that aspect, watching if how they dealt with things as a more mature couple compared to the older days. I thought that was a very good aspect to it, because you do change so much, don't you, as you get older, and the things that life throws at you're not prepared at all when you're like a teenager and you think you know it all and you really don't. Did you have similar reasons, Katrina, for second chance romance?
I've always been a big fan of second chance romance. I like the fact that second chance romance has a lot of opportunity for angst, which I love to write, and I love yearning, and I love, so I love all of that, the drama associated with having a second chance romance. So that's why I tend to like to go for them. But also, yeah, I like exploring reasons why people didn't work out in the first place. I like bringing them back together. I like exploring what has changed about their situation to bring back those old feelings, because there is always, this element of old feelings, but also being layered on new feelings and new situations. And there's so much opportunity to kind of explore that past-present dynamic in second chance romance. And I love the past-present dynamic and the ways that in second chance they tend to play a part together, just in general. My second chance romances often include a dual timeline scenario. So yeah. I have this past timeline kind of, in alternating with a present timeline. And so then you get to play with the feelings that way as well. And so I love writing that aspect about it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that dual timeline, to get to see them as the younger couple and see all the little problems that came out, and then how they felt about them as they were older now, and then like you said, the angst and the yearning, it just leaps from the pages. And I found that in both books, actually, that there's that angst in them both, and that real sense of like, oh, we've lost so much, but then also, can I trust this person? Not to hurt me again. Because the feelings are there, but you don't know whether to give them that other chance, do you? And it's that battle between the heart and the head, and it just really makes the books. I couldn't tear myself away, and it was a first-time read for both books. I mean, am I right in thinking this is your debut, Katie?
No, so I've done some.
No, sorry.
I've done some other books as well, but they're sort of slightly different. They're set in like an alternative Regency world. Right. So nothing I write is what you would call a traditional romance. They tend to be lots of historical type fiction and action with the heavy romantic subplot. So I think for me as well, with Cresta and Greville, it was also just that sense of like, not only could they find a way back to each other, but should they as well? That definitely runs through both books, doesn't it? That can they, should they, will they, will they give in to these feelings? So both of you have mentioned that your books are set in the historical period, and I'm a huge fan of historical books of any genre. What was it, though, that drew you to write about the period you chose? Was there something that stood out? I'll start with you Katrina, this time.
I prefer to write about the Victorian era. I love, for me, the Victorian era is so interesting because, you have this, all of this new technology kind of coming in, and then you have all of this new money coming in. And so there is So the class divide is blurring a bit more, and you know, and so I find that kind of interesting. So there's you know, this massive influx of people coming into positions of power because you know, from humble beginnings. And you know, and that's interesting. So I love this aspect of class and technology, and you know, and then, you know, all of these heavy discussions about poverty and that sort of thing, which I kind of tend to approach in my work as well. And so there's just so much of that happening, and it kind of yields a lot of interesting you know, opportunities for discussions in romance and interplays between you know, between classes in romance, and lots of heavy topics as well. Again, with the angst, which I'm a big fan of, so that allows a lot of opportunity for angst.
There is. I'm a big fan of anything Victorian as well, so I love that era. What about you, Katie? What drew you to the Regency period?
I think for me, it's the contrast between the sort of glittering wealth and the reality beneath that of the extreme poverty. I just think that it just the contrast is so shocking, and it's just sort of a period that's endlessly fascinated me for that reason. Just how you can have these two completely different worlds almost coexisting side by side. I think it was really interesting. Katrina said as well about how, you know, by the Victorian times, those social boundaries were blurring a little bit more, which was something I particularly enjoyed about Katrina's books as well, is that you can sort of see that happening, whereas in the Regency, it's so much more rigid and the stakes are high because of the rules that you have to adhere to keep your position.
Yeah, there is that element of the rules in your book, isn't there? And I found those really fascinating, like the different social rules that they had to have in their mind at all times in everything they were doing, and that fear of breaking them and losing your position was so prominent, and that like jumped out from the pages for me and just raised the tension. Excuse me. So both women in the books are feisty, strong characters, and they go against societal norms for their time period. Was that a conscious choice for you? What made you want to do that, if it was? I'll start with you, Katie, this time.
Well, so at the time when I was writing the book, I was working on a historical research project about the lives of the camp followers, so the women and the children that used to follow the army in the Napoleonic period, and would actually literally be sometimes following the soldiers onto the battlefield the morning after, looking for their loved ones. And I just was quite fascinated by that. It wasn't something I knew very much about before, and it raised one of those sort of what if questions to me that tend to spark things for novelists. Like, most of the women in Cresta's position as somebody who would be following the drum would not have been living with an ordinary soldier. Someone of her social position would, if anything, have been married to an officer and have had a very, very, very different experience to Cressida's experience. So I guess it was just that question of like, what would happen if a girl had fallen completely from her position in society and had to literally run away with the army.
Yeah, it was. I'd never heard of it before, and I found it very fascinating to read that there were these women that did this. It was like, oh, that's something new, that it made me go down this rabbit hole afterwards. And that's another thing I love about historical fiction. I don't know about the two of you, where you just find out new things and then you go and research it as a reader, as well as I imagine as an author you do as well. What about you, Katrina? What drew you to writing such a strong character?
So I try to write both unconventional heroines and heroes. So it is a very conscious choice. So for me, it's very much about appealing to a modern audience and making sure that it also resonates with a modern audience. And so I tend to to write write feisty heroines and very rebellious heroes, and you know, ones that kind of tend to go against their social conventions. That's just something that I tend to prefer as a reader, something that you know, that appeals to me as a romance fan as well. And so I just tend to gravitate towards that and write it just so that it has a sort of modern sensibility, and it isn't kind of it doesn't feel you know, aged, that it will, you know, that it will kind of be a bit of a timeless it will have a timeless feel to it, if that makes sense.
It does. And it definitely does do that, because it means that as modern readers we can go, oh, I know how that feels. Yeah. And I can relate to this character. You don't feel like they're from another time period almost. You feel like they're someone you could know and you could be in their shoes, yeah, even though they're in a totally alien time space and position.
Yeah.
But so that's one of the things I love about those sort of characters as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, struggling with my throat a bit tonight. So what research did you both have do for these books? Katrina, what did your research look like for your book?
I do a lot of research into Victorian era London and, you know, the poverty of Victorian era London. For this series, I started to do a lot of research into Victorian era spycraft and kind of spycraft around, you know, not just like in the specific time period that I'm writing, but also kind of slightly before that. It is kind of a fantasy in that aspect. Like the spycraft, the level of spycraft that I am writing is probably more in line with fantasy than historical. I am a fantasy writer as well, so those kind of tend to that kind of tends to be incorporated into my historical writing. But in terms of the research, I was very interested, just between my fantasy and my historical, in The Great Game, which was kind of this, you know, this conflict between the UK and Russia throughout the 1800s. And basically, you know, that there was a lot of spycraft going on between Britain and Russia. And you know, of course, there's around the Crimean War and that sort of thing, and basically where you have people, you know, British spies going to Russia under the guise of essentially like mapping the geography of the country, and they're actually there to spy and that sort of thing. And you know, I was just really interested in that, and you know, and I got pretty dark with it, and that is indeed a fantasy aspect of that. But I also researched kind of more contemporary spycraft as well, and I incorporated that a bit, as you know, kind of into it from a historical perspective. So there's like this element of me incorporating more Cold War spycraft elements into this Victorian era setting. So that's the kind of research that I did.
Yeah, you went very deep, didn't you? And that really does come through in the book, because it really can tell you know what's happening. Yeah. And as a reader, it just makes it feel so natural, everything you're reading, because you believe it. Yeah. Because the author knows what they're talking about.
For this book, in particular, I had to do a lot of research into code breaking, especially. I don't know anything about, like, I didn't know anything about code breaking, and there's a lot of like mathematics involved, and I am not a math person, and so I had to. There was this like this wild rabbit hole that I had to go down, because I really like did not know anything about codes, and so what I did do, I'm just gonna say it. So what I really did do is I did a lot of research into the Zodiac Killer, and the fact that the Zodiac Killer, you know, did a lot of his messages. Well, he did his messages in code, and some of them have still not been broken. Some of those codes took decades and decades to break. Some of them were broken instantly, and so I did incorporate like some Zodiac Killer research into this book.
Brilliant. Perfect excuse to read up on a bit of true crime, which I'm very partial to myself. I love that. I love knowing that. What about you, Katie? What did your research look like for this book?
Well, also a big element of spying as
Mm.
well. But the three alternate universe regencies that I wrote before, which was a trilogy, the first one is called Game of Hearts, they also centered around, like, interestingly enough, like almost like the beginning of the Great Game. So that kind of shenanigans between Britain and Russia, but much earlier in the 19th century. So almost like the earliest part of that. But the other thing that I became really interested in was reading about British radical history as well, and how sort of after the French Revolution, the government in the UK was absolutely terrified of revolution. And so often rebel groups would be infiltrated by the police or by government agencies, and they would sort of set up a situation that was perhaps never going to happen, that would make the group appear worse than they were, and then lo and behold they could all be caught and thrown into prison or executed. So that kind of thing was quite common. So that sort of entrapment side of things I was really interested in for My Lady's Secrets, and so a lot of the plot centers around that kind of procedure of like setting traps for groups of radicals or groups of people who you think might be about to rebel against the government. And it was all sort of set off by the murder of the Prime Minister in the House of Commons. It happens like right at the beginning of the book, and it actually happened in real life as well. And so there's a whole quite fascinating rabbit hole you can fall into about why and how that happened, and whether the motivations of the man that did it were really what they seemed, or whether they could have been something else there going on as well.
It's it's really interesting, isn't it, how you can find these snippets from real life and then end up down these rabbit holes, and I loved how you incorporated, both of you, like bits of historical fact with the fiction as well, and that really interests me as a reader to know that these little things happened, and now they're in the book, and then you spun that web from them. So you don't read, well, I haven't personally read that many sort of romance spy novels, especially in the historical area. But both of you have written that, and I absolutely loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. What was it that drew you to write a spy novel as well as a romance? Where did that sort of idea spark? Katie, first of all.
I think for me, it was just the research that I'd done over the years into the Napoleonic conflict. And it's quite often there'll be some little snippet that you stumble on that you perhaps let germinate for a few years, and then it bursts into life in something else. So for me, I was reading about one of the camp followers, can't remember where, possibly in Spain in the early 1800s, and her passing a tiny piece of rolled up paper to somebody else with something contained within it. I can't even remember where I read it, but it just sort of lodged in my memory, and it's popped up in a couple of my books. It's popped up in my alternate universe regencies as well, and My Lady's Secrets as well. It sparked that whole what if she was a camp follower? What would she have to do to survive? What could she do to survive?
Yeah.
So I think it's that.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it, how you can read just a little sentence and then a whole book can sort of like become reality from that through your imagination and your talent. It's interesting. What about you, Katrina? What was it that made the spy side appeal to you?
I was writing a fantasy novel called To Cage a God, as my other pen name, Elizabeth May, and that's about revolution and spycraft. So that was where initially kind of my research into the Great Game came about, because I was reading a lot about spying and specifically kind of the Russian Revolution circa 50 to about 1900. And so kind of while I was writing that, I was watching a great deal of kind of Russian historical dramas. It's like Russian Ukrainian historical dramas. And so I was kind of like immersed in, these Russian dramas kind of set like around the revolution. And, I just kind of like, as I was like writing, I kept thinking about the British and the Russian kind of like level of spying going on, and it just seemed like a really, really interesting angle to kind of set a romance. So I experimented with it a bit in my book A Bride by Morning, where which is about not just like he's a British spy, but he's also a former assassin who infiltrated a Russian crime organization. And I loved writing about that because it creates a nice kind of tension, a nice amount of conflict. Again, that was another second chance romance as well, and it added kind of like this other layer of drama on top of the romance drama. And I loved that aspect of it because then it gives like a nice nice external conflict for the couple to overcome together, which kind of brings them more. It brings them closer. It forces them to work together. And I love external conflicts in the way that external conflicts kind of allow the couple to bond in that situation and overcome something together, rather than like a lot of romances incorporate something called the third act breakup, which kind of tends to be like an internal conflict that breaks them up temporarily before they get back together for their happily ever after. And for my work, I tend to shy away from the third act breakup and tend to introduce like an external conflict that happens that the main couple overcomes together. And Spycraft just really kind of tended to introduce that, because then you have like an external enemy that both that couple kind of outsmarts or outwits, and it just I like that aspect of it.
Nice. It was great. And sorry, my cat's decided to join.
Cats are always welcome in the conversation.
Yeah, he likes to jump on my knee when I'm doing these, don't you? So, he's wondering why I'm not reclined backwards. That's what's up with him at the minute. That's my normal position. I think I did like that whole where they have to come together to try and overcome this thing together. It really adds to that tension and the drama and even the passion between them. And that's something, the spicy scenes in your book, I've got to be honest, I was so glad not to be reading it in public. I was like almost blushing at times. So good. I loved it. I mean, both books are a little bit spicy, but yours is definitely on that higher level. And it was great, it was an important, it wasn't gratuitous. It was like a real important part of the story. And but in both instances, you felt that passion that the characters had for each other. And, that internal monologue of desire that they had really put you in their shoes and really made you believe in the second chance romance. So what is it, how did you know how much spice was the right amount of spice with your book? I'll start with you, Katrina, this time.
Let's see. I'm trying to think because I do think my books kind of grew a bit progressively spicier as they've gone on, but I tend to go by couple. I try not to force like a certain amount. Whatever feels natural and whatever scenario feels natural. What I do before I kind of like, get down to work on it is part of my characterization is basically, where is this couple likely to have sex? And yeah, like, and for me, that is a big aspect of characterization. It's a big aspect of personality. What is the couple's dynamic intimately? What is, what are some ways that I can kind of explore, essentially the way that they bond through intimacy, and what are they into, basically? What kind of, like, what are they like in private with each other? Because, and that's a dynamic that I played a bit with in this book, where Julian is a bit more of like a kind of starchy character in society, but with Caroline and in private, he is quite filthy.
Yes, he's very different.
Yeah. And he kind of matches his freak a bit. So, and so that, so those layers of intimacy are really important to me when I'm writing. And, in some ways, some characters will need to be, they're kind of a bit more, more romantic and, less kind of, like kinky, basically. It just depends on the character. It's like, my assassin in Bride by Morning is, he suffers from PTSD, and so that is kind of incorporated in his intimacy scenes in those. And so, and then in like, one of my earlier books, which is his Scandalous Lessons, those scenes tend to be a bit softer and more romantic, because those two characters are just very soft with each other. And so, and then in this one, they are very, very, enamored with each other. They're very, almost feral for each other, because they've been apart for 8 years, and so that plays into their dynamics. So, so for me, I don't tend to think of like, hitting like a certain spice amount. For me, it's about the couple and their dynamic and the way that they kind of play with each other, and then that just tends to come out in the way that they interact at each scene.
No, they definitely did have a very raw chemistry, and
definitely after 8 years.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. But it did feel right for the couple, as you say, didn't it? What about you, Katie? Do you sort of think of the level of spiciness, or do you do the same thing where it's just sort of natural depending on the couple?
I think, definitely the latter. I think with Cressida and Greville, I think part of it was this sort of balance between them meeting and coming together for the first time in several years, and then just being like, oh, for God's sake, I literally cannot believe I still fancy him, or I still fancy her. They are both so annoyed about the fact that, like, they have betrayed each other and hurt each other so badly. And so there is that question that runs through the book of like, should these two people get back together? Like, is this a good idea? Have they changed and grown enough for that to happen? And for that to even be a question, there had to be quite a strong attraction between them. But it's something that they really fight at the beginning. Like, they just are both like appalled when they first see each other again about the fact that they still really fancy each other so much. So I think it really varies from book to book. Like, all my books, I wouldn't describe any of them as like a traditional two-hander romance, though I love reading romance. But I think it's just a really strong thread between them all, and that sort of attraction between those two main characters is such an important part of that. Like, if it's not there, then it can't ever work, and there's no reason for those people in that particular scenario to sort of find their way back to each other. I mean, there's all different kinds of relationships and all different kinds of, like, love that you can have for people, but in these cases they are both pretty, like, disgusted by how much they still have the hots for each other when they encounter each other again. So it kind of flowed from that.
Yeah, I loved that. I loved how they were both like, "Oh, I fancy you so much. Oh God, I can't believe I still fancy him." It really, it was great because I think most of us have had a similar situation where even if you've not been in a relationship, you can't believe you fancy someone who's a complete nasty person or something, or they've hurt you really badly, and then you still have the hots for them, and you're like, "What? Why is my body doing this when my brain's saying they're waving the red flag and I need to run in the opposite direction?" And like you say, they've hurt each other so much, haven't they? That there really is this question: should they be together despite it all? And I agree. I think that that connection with that chemistry they had, it really made you think maybe this is worth fighting for. Maybe this is worth trying again and trying to overcome the pain they've caused. And without it, like you said, they wouldn't have had a reason. So I think no, that was a very good sort of don't even really know where I'm going with this one, but I think we've lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Yeah, it really did help though that you believe in the characters for sure. And let me find my next question because the cat's kind of here we go. Right, I've got a few more general questions now. It's been great talking about the books, but I'm kind of also interested in what your writing day looks like. Have you got a typical writing day, Katie? Starting with you, do you have a routine?
Well, at the moment, I'm sort of not writing very much. I'm in a little bit of a fallow period at the moment. I'm in a sort of wintering phase, put it that way. And but when I'm writing, I really love writing first thing in the morning, and that's something that with life and caring responsibilities and work and things just isn't always possible. But when that can happen, that for me is the sweet spot. I think there's something about that state of mind before you've even done anything. Like if I can just make a cup of coffee, I can go from that sort of liminal, half asleep state into the writing state. And there's something, I don't know, it probably sounds a bit pretentious, but there's something about that where it just feels like it's easier to slip into it. I would find it quite hard to write after a day at work, I think. Although that said, when I first started writing, I was working full-time in publishing, and I used to be writing longhand every lunchtime. So I don't know.
Wow.
I think sometimes if it's going to come out, it's going to come out, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it doesn't. I don't think it sounds pretentious. Everyone's got different best times of day. Like me, I'm no good for anything first thing in the morning. So for me, anything that I want to do, I'm better in the evening, which for a lot of people, it's the opposite, isn't it? So I think if it works for you, that's great.
I'm
And
definitely not a morning person in any other way. Like if anyone tried to speak to me, that would be bad. But writing is fine.
That's great. What about you, Katrina? What's your writing routine, if you've got one, or best time of day to write?
In the morning. I am not a morning person. I mean, I kind of tend to like, and, you know, in fact, like there is not much that I could do in the morning. I am absolutely 100% a night owl. I probably do most of my writing work from between the hours of midnight to like 5 in the morning.
Sounds like me. Yeah.
So you know, I'm a full-time writer, so I don't have like a traditional kind of schedule. I don't have I don't have like a day job. I mean, my writing is my day job. So so I do tend to like go to bed at around 6 a.m. and then wake up at like 1, and then it's my schedule is a really like wild schedule. I tell people my schedule and they're just like, what is happening? And I'm like, no, I'm a pure night owl. An adulterated night owl cannot function at a normal time. And it was actually when I started to kind of just do my natural schedule that my writing just really I was able to do more writing, and I was able to kind of create more of a schedule, because I used to try to force my writing either in the morning or like in the afternoon when everybody is awake, and I used to try to force myself to go to bed at a certain time or wake up at a certain time. And then when I moved here, when I moved to like the countryside outside of the city, because I used to live in Edinburgh, my husband was just like, why are you trying to do this to yourself? Like, you don't go to like a desk job. You work at home. And you can set your own hours. Just do what feels natural to you. You don't have to do this to yourself.
Yeah, you've got the perfect job for that.
Yeah. And so I was just like, okay, so we will just see. Well, we will have me sleep whenever I feel like it, wake up whenever I feel like it, write whenever I feel like it, and see what we come up with, essentially. And what ended up happening was just essentially me every single night writing, finding it natural to sit down and write at about midnight to about 5 a.m. Wake or go to sleep at about 6 a.m. after an hour of reading, and then wake up at about 1 p.m. And I have been doing that for 3 years now. And yeah, I've written so many more books. And you know, I do that every night now, every single night. So it's 7 days a week. If I stop, then I find myself struggling to get back into it. So I do work about 7 days a week, and
Wow.
I love it. I love writing. So
well, you must have, otherwise you'd want more breaks. You know, the fact that you love it that much, you know, you've got to, haven't you, to do it that often.
yeah.
That's great. It's nice. It's actually quite nice as a night owl myself to hear someone who hasn't got a traditional schedule. But I do admire people that can sit and write first thing in the morning. I really do. I wish that I could function to do writing or reading more in the morning and get up at an earlier time like the rest of the world. But my body just doesn't like that.
Well, my body.
It's,
I feel you.
yeah. So. But yes, it's really good, and it's interesting to have two people that are on total opposite ends of the spectrum. So have you always written, both of you? Is it something that's always been there? And how long have you been doing this professionally? I'll start with you, Katrina, this time.
So I have been writing full time now for 13 years. And before my first book contract, I have written probably creatively since I was a kid. I started writing full-length novels when I was a preteen, so it's just something that's kind of embedded in my life at this point. I am uniquely ill-suited to literally any other kind of job, not just because of the schedule that is like apparently quite natural to me, but also just because you know, this is what I enjoy doing, it's what I love doing, and it's what I have pretty much done for, you know, pretty much my entire life at this point. You know, I am 13 years into my career now.
Brilliant. And what about you, Katie? How long have you been writing?
Oh, such a long time as well. So I think also like 12, so not even teenager, when I wrote my first full length thing. And I remember being kind of embarrassed about it and thinking that like if anybody found out, everyone would just be like, oh, what have you done that for? So I didn't tell anyone for a really long time as well. But I used to write at night when I was younger, and I just absolutely loved it. And I've been doing it professionally since 2008. I used to write kids' books. So the first kids' book, which was set in the sort of Dark Age Britain, 7th century Britain, with a little bit of magic, came out in 2008. And then I've just done all kinds of different books since then. Wow. Some sort of folklore, urban fantasy stuff.
That's
about 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look at both your backlists for sure.
Yeah.
Such an extensive backlist.
Yeah, I've been very intrigued by Katrina stroke Elizabeth's as well. I think I'm definitely going to want to dive into that for sure.
I know I've got a proof of Takeda God, and I've had that waiting for a long time, and I'm even more, now I know it's yours, I'm even more intrigued and excited to pick that up. But now I'm definitely going to be exploring your back catalogues, because I just loved both books so much. And it's always a risk with a new author, but it's also really exciting because you go in with no preconceived ideas. You're just ready to experience what they've got to give. And it was honestly a joy reading both books. So, you know, I'm really honoured that I was asked to do this, because it made me pick them up sooner than I would have So, and I like it when an author's got a back catalogue, because it means, I mean, I know it makes the TBR longer, but it gives us more fun books to read, definitely. So, what other authors do you find have influenced your writing? Katie, what about you?
Oh, well, I think probably one of the reasons I started writing about the Regency was because of Georgette Heyer, so absolute classic. And then another influence has been Dorothy Dunnett, and that was because a wonderful journalist called Sarah Hughes wrote a piece about Game of Kings, which is Dorothy Dunnett's first novel in one long series that she did, which is absolutely amazing thing to fall into. And she was writing a newspaper article about all the authors that had been influenced by Dorothy Dunnett, and she included me in it because she could see that, and I was like, but I've never read Dorothy Dunnett. And so I was super intrigued as to like what it was like, and I was, I just absolutely loved that series. It's the most sort of gripping, heartrending series I've ever read, Game of Kings, and it's all about that sort of spycraft, warcraft, slightly earlier than both of the books that me and Katrina have written, but just absolutely loved it. And that series has ended up being a big influence on me with it's just all like the family connections within the books as well. So it's not just about any romantic pairings, but also like all the family and friendships as well, which I just absolutely loved. So yeah, definitely been a big influence now.
What a great way to find an author. That's like so unique, isn't it? I'm sure no one else has got a story like that. That's fantastic. I've actually made a note of that because that sounds really interesting. What about you, Katrina? What authors have influenced you?
I mean, I started reading romance from a very young age, and actually my very first romance was Julia Quinn's The Duke and I, which is the first season of Bridgerton. And so, so I would definitely say that probably got me into historical romance in a really big way. I absolutely love Lisa Kleypas, who's just incredible. She has such a massive backlist, and just like probably one of the most like solid writing careers that I, of like there are certain authors where it's just like every single thing that they write is like so good. And Lisa Kleypas is like one of those authors where you just read her books and it's like a weak Lisa Kleypas book is still like one of the best. Still amazing. And and so she has definitely influenced me in a big way. Also Elizabeth Hoyt, who wrote a series called Maiden Lane, and Elizabeth Hoyt's books are just so sexy. Like they are so sexy, and I love how gritty they are. I love how like somebody, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Sarah McLean, who is another author I really love, described them as like earthy sexy, and I was just like, I didn't know until I read them, and I was like, yeah, no, I get it. They are quite earthy sexy. So yeah, I love her books as well. She incorporates a lot of like kind of crime elements, a lot of kind of darker elements and corruption as well. I really love Elizabeth Hoyt's books.
Oh, great. Got some authors to look into there from both of you. Thank you. So if anyone's got any questions, can you pop them in the chat and we can start asking viewer questions to the authors if anyone has them. I don't think we've really had much. Oh, I can see more now. Oh, my chat's just been at the top the whole time, so it looked like no one was saying anything. So we'll see if we get any questions. Meanwhile, I've got a few more here that we can look at. What advice would you give anyone who wants to write a novel? I'll start with you, Katrina.
Like a novel in general, or like a historical novel?
Anything, either, both.
Oh goodness. Mine would definitely be starting with like, you know, characters. What kind of characters do people want to write? I find that my books have kind of improved over time because I started writing from characters rather than like ideas specifically. Like I have this kind of like notion in my head of the type of book that I wanted to write, but I would start to focus on like the kind of character that I wanted to write, the kind of romance that I wanted to write, and then from there I would just build outward of the like from there, like, you know, the kind of background situation would kind of inform their romance, the conflicts in their romance, and that sort of thing. And so I always recommend people to kind of like start with like a general concept of like what they want to write and then really build out from the character aspect of it. I believe that's something that's recommended in the book Story Genius as well. I've heard really, really excellent things about that book. So yeah, so that's my advice.
That's good advice. What about you, Katie? What advice would you have?
What I always say to creative writing students is don't look down. If you look down, you'll get scared and just put yourself off a little bit. So I think once you've started, just go at it with a spirit of exploration and fun and enjoyment. And I would also agree with Katrina as well about the character is where you're going to find the answer to most of your questions. Like if you get stuck at any point with something that you're writing, if you return to the character and interrogate them, interrogate about their past history, the environment that they live in, 9 times out of 10 you'll find the answer to your plot problem with your character, or even just a case of writer's block as well. You can just you just write, asking yourself those questions like where did you go to school about a character can just take you off in so many different directions. Like where were you educated? That can just lead you off into so many different routes that will just be quite inspiring rather than making you sort of worry about where you've got stuck. So I would just advise exploring other areas of character that you may not have thought of before as well, and that should sort of lead you back to giving you the answer of how to progress through your problem. Like how are they going to get out of this situation? If you don't know the answer to that, you need to get to know them a little bit better.
That's really good advice, both of you. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Right, we've had a question from Shannon. Are there any other historical eras you'd like to write about? What about you, Katie, first of all?
I am quite feeling a bit of a pull at the moment towards going back to the really super early medieval period. That was one of the first books I wrote, was set in 7th century Britain, and for some reason I'm just feeling like a little bit of a pull towards that at the moment. So I don't know, who knows, but that's what I'm feeling.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Great. What about you, Katrina? Is there anything you'd like to write about?
You know, I do sometimes kind of toy with the notion of writing a book set in the 20s. I find it to be such an interesting era. There's actually there's a lot of, you know, London crime organizations that kind of like take place around the 20s. And so yeah, so I definitely kind of toy with the idea of doing the 20s, but I'm not sure.
That sounds like it could be good. I think you should go with it and see what happens. Right, we've got a question from Yaz. Do you see your stories being adapted for the screen, Katrina? Do you see that for any of your stories?
You know, I don't tend to kind of think in terms of like whether or not it will do well on film. I know for a fact that my Elizabeth May books will be way too expensive to adapt. They're not written at all in mind, like for film. Yeah, and my Katrina books are, I mean, I guess I never would have thought that they would have done Julia Quinn either. So I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. What about you, Katie? Do you think yours could be adapted?
I think there's something about the revolving point of view that can work quite well in screen adaptations, but they definitely weren't written with that in mind. I think the experience of writing when it's going well can feel a bit like being in a film. It can feel a bit like really being surrounded in Technicolor by all of those sort of surroundings, and you can sort of see, taste and touch and smell everything. So it's quite a kind of, all the five senses when you're really in the flow of writing. But yeah, they weren't really written with that in mind.
I mean, a book doesn't have to be adapted to be amazing, in my opinion, and sometimes the adaptations cannot be as good. So, or they can be great, but no, it's they're both good to sit and read for sure. So that, to me, that's what matters when I'm picking up a book. I don't think, oh, am I reading something that one day will get adapted for the screen? But
it's so good
like
when it works well. I'm completely addicted to Rivals at the moment. So
I've not started that. I've heard good things. I need to watch that.
It's a lot of fun.
Yes, yeah. Like you say, when they're done well, they're great, aren't they? We've had a question from AC. When is the translation of Ice? I've been waiting since 2015. Do we? I
don't think that.
Don't know.
Might be for.
Is that Katrina? Is that one of yours?
No, I've never written a book called Ice, so I don't know.
Okay. I've no idea then. Okay. Bit of a, right. I think that's all, and that looks like our time's pretty much up. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining tonight. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you both, and it was a pleasure to read both your books. Don't forget that this Friday you can get on Head of Zeus's Instagram page, you could win a copy of The Wayward Duke, wrong way around, and My Lady's Secrets. So pick up these books, go to the competition, but also purchase the books because they are absolutely fantastic. Thank you again, and it was really good to talk to you tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us. Really nice to talk to you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, guys. Bye.